All right, chapter 13. I hope that as you've gone through these videos that you're getting a better understanding of how this real estate world works and prepared for the exam that's coming up. So when you go through these videos, there may be some questions that you'll have that'll come up. What I want to encourage you to do is to use your resources first, try and figure out the answer. Not because I'm lazy, but because when you do that, you're going to give yourself a better avenue to retain the knowledge that you're getting through these videos, because you're doing the research yourself. So that's my recommendation, if you can go down that route first. But other than that, please hold your questions, and you can shoot me an email. You can also hold them for our last day of class. We're going to have a little bit of Q&A that we can go through together as a group, so that you can get a better understanding of how this all works. So feel free to do that. Make sure you're taking your quizzes that are a part of this course. But today we're going to discuss Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is on condominiums and co-ops. You have your handouts, your PowerPoint slides that go with this, so please follow along as we go through this. You're going to see some repeat. That's one of the beauties of this real estate course, is that the first few days may seem like you are drinking from a fire hose because there's just a ton of information, but we do seem to reiterate it as we go through. Not everything, but most of it. So condominiums and co-ops is an important aspect to understand and know for your state and national exams. We also are going to talk about property management in the chapters to come. It's also a very important chapter to pay attention to. But for now, on Chapter 13, condominiums and co-ops. So a condominium it's a pretty lengthy definition, but the reason why I have it written this way is because it not only combines the definition from the book, but it also combines the definition from the A&P book. And that's what I've done to many of these slides, is I also have brought in study from the A&P book. The A&P book is a textbook that you'll receive on your last day of class, and it's going to be one of your biggest assets to helping you pass that national exam. The A&P book is written in a manner that the test is actually written in. And I may have said this in a previous video, but if I was to tell a story to Bob and I was to tell the same story to Sandy, in fact, they were both sitting in the room while I told the story, and you asked Bob to explain it to you and you asked Sandy to explain it to you, you would get the gist of the story, but they would explain it in different ways. And if you had to take a test over it, it'd be much easier to take a test that Bob wrote over the story that Bob told you, as opposed to taking a story over Sandy's story and it's written by Bob. And so that's kind of how this A&P book works versus your main textbook. Why do we use the main textbook? Well, the primary reason we use that main textbook is because how it's set up. It gives you it approaches it from a more simple, a more basic way, and has charts and pictures and graphs to help explain what they're talking about, as opposed to the A&P book, which is very much just a study manual for the most part. There's several tests. In fact, there's a disc in the back that's going to give you a couple hundred tests to take as well, or test questions, I should say. So that's why I'm combining the two, because the A&P book is written like how the test is written. So for you to understand the verbiage and to pass the test, you're going to want to focus on the A&P book that you get the last day. But to get the foundation, we need to use the textbook that we are using currently. So, condominiums, individual ownership or ownership in severalty in a single family air lot or airspace with shared ownership in the common areas. Okay? That is the example, or the definition, I should say, of a condominium. We'll see some pictures in the textbook that'll help you understand that as well. But condominium has this master deed and declaration. It conveys or converts the property to single deeded estates, and the owner of the development will file that deed and the declaration in the records of the county that that property is located in. The declaration is like the constitution of a condo. It gives a description of the units. It establishes the undivided percentage interests. It places the authority with the board of directors, or that governing body of the homeowners association. Before we get too far into this, I want to explain something quick to you about the difference between a townhome and a twin home. A twin home is not going to be considered a condo because you actually get ground with it. We'll see in a couple pictures here to come that when we define a condo, you're actually getting just what's within the four walls. So if you were here with me in this classroom, you would see that this classroom's roughly a rectangular shape. And so we have four walls. And really, when I purchase a condo, that's what I'm getting. I'm getting everything within those four walls. That's mine. Everything outside of those four walls, the roof, the siding, the parking lot, the foyer, public restrooms, if they are in the building, they of course would be in the building. Most of them don't have outhouses, but those types of elements are going to be considered owned by everybody as tenants in common. So when I look at a twin home, I'm actually getting the entire house or that parcel because it's divided. It has its own lot, its own legal description, and that's going to be the primary difference. The definition that you'll see in your handout is it's not considered a condo because you're actually buying dirt with it. So let's look up here at a picture, and I drew that. I drew this dotted line here to help you see the two lots, and this will have its own legal description. Let's say this one is lot 8 of block 7. Let's call this lot 8A, and we'll call this one lot 8B of block 7. So we have our own legal description. The townhouse is a little bit trickier because it could be a condo, or it could be set up like a twin home where you're actually buying the dirt with it. But a true townhome is more of just the description of it from an architectural standpoint. And you could see on a test, it could be called a row house, R-O-W, as you see in your handout. The reason why we're going to, again, see these different definitions or different terms, even though they mean the same thing, is because if you go from state to state, here we call it a townhome. Maybe in New Jersey or maybe in Arizona, they call it a row house. And so when we look at the national exam, it's what it is. It's a national exam. So they are covering all their bases. So I want to make sure you understand that as well. So with a townhouse or townhome or row house, this is going to be 4 units sandwiched together, and they have an upstairs. That's why I have that dashed line. And I'll put some windows up here as well to help you out. So it's more of a description of the architectural style when I say townhome. But in this scenario, I could be buying it as a condo where I just get what's within, again, the four walls of the structure and everything else is set up as a common element or tenancy in common as far as ownership goes. Or I could be buying the dirt that goes with it, and then I'd have my own separate legal description, just like the twin home. Next, you'll see this picture. It's also in your textbook as well, but it's in your handout. And you'll see that the air rights, the surface and subsurface rights, and basically everything outside, again, those four walls are owned as tenancy in common or as tenants in common. And the unit, your particular unit, is exclusively owned. You own that. Next one, we have a picture of, it looks like a ranch style house. And we have, in that, we own everything. We own the air rights, the surface rights, and subsurface rights. We exclusively own those. So that is going to be the drastic difference when we talk about ownership, or if you remember back to our chapter, we talked about our sticks or bundle of rights. Condo, as described in the first slide, is an air lot. You're purchasing an air lot. Bylaws. Bylaws govern and provide for the operation of the homeowners association. The developer will control or own until no longer are they the majority owner. So if I look at this scenario up here, let's say I have another set of row houses or townhouses. So I have two separate buildings, 4 townhouses in each. So I have 8 total units. And let's say this developer is selling these off as condos. Once these 4 are sold, and he sells the next one, now he's no longer the majority owner. There's only 3 vacant ones left that he has left to sell or she has left to sell. And so now that governing body is going to have to be formed so that they can run that association. If you see on the slide as well, it'll say that you can condo anything except for ag land. You can condo anything except for agricultural ground. And we'll see the different examples of that as we continue. The CC&R, these are the condominiums, covenants, and restrictions. And it's the responsibility of you as the agent to make sure that you get these for your buyers. If you're working with a buyer that's going to be looking at purchasing a condo, you're going to make sure that they read through that. As well as you, when you're representing a seller, when you're their agent, you're going to make sure that you get that from them so you can make that available to the agents that have buyers that they're bringing in. It says in that CC&R what you can and can't do within that condominium. It also establishes how that governing body is going to be set up and organized, and miscellaneous things of that nature. So if you have, for instance, a buyer that is a pet lover, and let's say they have 3 large dogs and a couple cats, and they're looking at purchasing a condo. That's what trips their trigger, and you've been showing them condos. You're going to especially make sure that you read through and have them read through that CC&R, because there are some condo associations that don't allow pets. There are some that do allow pets, but only certain sizes and only certain breeds. So that's one of the, maybe you could say the negatives of condo is that some do or don't allow pets. If you have allergies to pets and you're looking at buying a condo, you want to make sure that, I would think, that you found one that didn't have or wouldn't allow for pets. The association is next. The board of directors and officers are elected by the members. The governing body includes the president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. Our common elements, which we talked a little bit about before as far as everything outside of that unit that you exclusively own is owned as tenants in common. And so those elements outside of that Your exterior surfaces, interior common areas, and recreational areas are going to be considered common elements. So for example, a parking garage, or the park, if you have a park set up. The foyer itself is a common element. Some condominiums have, located within them, they have a kitchen and like a dining hall. So if you want to host Christmas within your condo, you can do that. Some have gyms or workout facilities or game rooms. Those would be examples of common elements. Limited common elements, though, are a little bit different. As you can see in the picture, we have large, which appears to be a condo, and it has these balconies. Now remember, I said anything that's outside of those four walls of your exclusively owned unit is going to be owned as tenants in common. So balcony would fit into that. Balcony would be considered a common element. But a balcony is also going to be a limited common element. I shouldn't say it's also, because I don't want you to think that it's both. If you're approaching your test and you see a question that says, which of the following are considered limited common elements, you're going to look for things like a balcony. It's a limited common element because it's limited to that owner's use. The owner of that particular unit is going to be using that balcony. Nobody else will be using that. Another example of that would be a reserved parking space. Let's say you have underground parking for this condominium. And so all those parking spaces are common elements. But if they are reserved, so only the certain members of the units can use those spaces, again, that's going to be a limited common element. So some advantages, you'll see this in your book as well. I don't have all of them listed. Again, I really tried to trim out the fat so that you can just focus on what's important for passing your exam. So some examples are pride of ownership, more living space, minimized upkeep, and location. One of the bigger benefits of a condo, especially if you live in a larger metropolitan city where you would like to live and work and play, like for instance downtown. Usually parking is limited and there's not a lot of housing, and so condos are appealing because you get set parking and you can live where you work and play. Some disadvantages are a lack of privacy, limited private outdoor space. You're not going to have usually your own yard where you can put in a garden, or you can put in your own swing set or items like that for the kids. You have restrictions and rules. It is, in a sense, like a glorified apartment. I know if you're a condo owner, you probably wouldn't like to hear that, but in a sense, we're talking about the disadvantages. You have a governing body that can make rules that are either in your favor or not in your favor, and the majority rule when it comes to making those decisions. So if you're one of the minorities, then you may not get your way. If you're in the majority, then you'll be tickled pink because you're getting what you want. And then parking is another disadvantage. Usually you may have one space or two spaces at the most. It's going to be typically outdoors. Not a lot of garages or underground parking, at least in this area. So there are some disadvantages like that. But like we talked about in Chapter 1, the cycle of ownership, it may be at a point, or you may be at a point in your life where condominiums just make sense, or you're buyers. And so if that's the avenue that your buyers are wanting to go down, and that's the point in their life that they're at, then you need to support that, of course. I talked about earlier that you can condo anything except for ag land. You can condo out, in this next slide you'll see, you can condo out commercial spaces. Office or commercial space can be condoed. In Sioux Falls, we have the first example of that in the state. If maybe on your way to Pro-Ed, you've driven by this. If you've been in Sioux Falls for any length of time, chances are you know where this is at. If you are looking at in Sioux Falls at the intersection of 49th Street and Western Avenue, on the corner there is a gas station, and then across the street is a Campbell Supply. And so just right north of the Campbell Supply is this L-shaped strip mall that's called Independence Plaza, and that has been condoed out. All of those units are set up as condos. So your traditional commercial space is leased. The tenant moves in and they pay rent every month to the owner, just like you're renting an apartment. On these spaces, since they've been condoed out, you don't go down the traditional road of paying rent, you actually own it. So you finance this space, you purchase it, and it's yours. It's a great setup for businesses that are going to be long-term, I don't want to say tenants, because they're not tenants, but they're going to reside there or use those premises long-term. And if you would happen to look at that strip mall there that's condoed out at Independence Plaza, you're going to find that a lot of those, at least half of those owners, have been there for a couple decades. They're long-term owners or businesses that have been there for a while. So it makes sense. Rather than paying rent every month, why not own the building or own your space? So if you have noticed throughout this course that I'll have a slide introducing a video. And so typically what happens is I show the video to the class, and then I'm giving you the slide so you can go to Pro-Ed's YouTube channel and view the video there. I have it set up that way for your convenience so you know exactly what's being shown in class, and I strongly encourage you to watch those videos. They're actually part of the course. So I want you to watch those videos because the way I explain it is great, and it may work well with you most of the time, but it may not work well with everybody all of the time. And so getting it from a different perspective can help you retain and understand all the information that's being given out. So a cooperative, as you've seen in the video, is different from a condominium. Both have these governing bodies or boards, and usually in a co-op they will elect, or I should say they will have a panel that will either say yes or no to you being able to buy into the co-op. Condominium has the same setup, but very rarely do they exercise that as you learned in the video. So when I look at a co-op, the thing that always comes to my mind is this tall, 20-plus story building that you'll see in New York, and they have that long awning coming out with the red carpet, and at the end of the red carpet is that portly gentleman with the top hat and tails. That's the picture I get when I think of a co-op. Usually in a co-op there's a front desk person that's always there to greet the people coming in as well, and also to make sure that the riffraff stays out. So some examples of that in movies that you may have seen. The movie Bad Boys, the first one. You'll see Will Smith lives in a condo or a co-op. A more recent movie, Mr. Popper's Penguins with Jim Carrey, he lives in a co-op. If you look at 13 Going on 30, another example of that, where she lives in a co-op as well, Jennifer Garner. So a co-op is a little bit different. When you do own the co-op, you still have, these within the four walls, that's what you have. That's what you exclusively own. But in a sense, you have ownership of an apartment unit, as you can see in the slide. The corporation has ownership of the shares, and that's what you're buying. You're buying shares or stock, and then when you purchase those, they give you what's called a proprietary lease, and this grants you the ability to occupy a particular unit. So what I want you to remember, as you'll still see in your slide, is that that proprietary lease is still a form of ownership. So that most likely will be a test question. You'll have something that will say which of the following is not a form of ownership, and you'll have things like maybe a land lease or a proprietary lease, and it's tempting to pick proprietary lease because it has the word lease in it, but it is still a form of ownership. That's what you get in a co-op that allows you to occupy a particular unit. Time sharing is the last portion of chapter 13. It's also known as interval ownership, and again, what I've done is I've incorporated information from the A&P book. So if you're looking at the textbook as well as the handouts and this video to follow along with everything, first off, kudos, that's quite a bit of stuff to take in. But you're going to see a little bit of differences in definitions, but it's more important that you understand what the A&P book says as opposed to the main textbook. So interval ownership is basically how we define time sharing. We have an undivided interest in a particular unit, undivided interest, and so we don't have exclusive interest like we do a condo. It's undivided interest. We are tenants in common with the other owners of that particular unit. And so if it's, let's say we buy a week's timeshare and they sell off 52 of those for that particular unit, because there's 52 weeks in a year. So we have 52 owners that all have 1 week ownership with this condo, or this timeshare. Then we'd have a 1/52nd ownership. Timesharing estate and timeshare use. They're a little bit different, not too much, but timesharing estate is buying an amount of time, where timeshare use is buying the right to use. And you'll see that on your slide. So that's it for chapter 13.